Have you ever thought about when a local grocery store cash and you're asked, would you like to donate $1 to this cause? And have you wondered, does the percentage of donations to charities come from corporations? Or if you, as a business owner or a freelancer, could also find a creative way to donate and support your favorite cause. Welcome to Business Not 101, a podcast that explores the uncommon side of business. I'm your host, Olivier Bousset, and in today's founder interview series, I'm joined by Augusto Sotelo of Goowi. We will discuss this and so much more.
Hi, Augusto. Thank you for joining us today on Business Not 101.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. All right, like we do with every guest, jump right in. Give us our 60-second business elevator pitch of your company.
Okay, so I'm Augusto from Goowi. Goowi is the Brands Philanthropy Platform. What we do is we leverage technology to empower brands, charities, and people to make greater social impact together. We do this by creating digital social initiatives. We call them goodwill waves. And depending on what type of social impact wants to be made or what wants to be measured, then we have different types of waves for different types of objectives. So basically, that's what we do.
Excellent. Excellent. So what was your aha moment that said, okay, this is needed in the market. This is what I need to do. It's my calling.
Well, actually, about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I was at the supermarket with my kids. I have 2 young kids, and we were at the cashier of the supermarket. And we were asked if I wanted to give $1 to charity. And I said no. So when we were walking to my car, my daughter asked me, why did I say no? And I said, well, I didn't connect with that charity. I didn't know what it actually was about. And I already support charities that I cared about. So they started asking me what charities I support and this and that. And all of a sudden in the car we were talking, does the supermarket actually gives money to charity? And that got me thinking. And that day that night I actually started doing some research. I found some shocking statistics about how actually little money is being given to charity by businesses. You will be shocked to know that only 5% of all the money given to charity is coming from businesses. 5%. It's crazy. I mean, the big majority is from people like you and I, and so the more I understood why it was happening, and the fact that I come from a background, in helping businesses promote their brands through promotional products, and I've been doing this for like 20 years or so, I started realizing that there was a way that maybe we could, use marketing and leverage technology to somehow merge philanthropy and marketing in a way that it would benefit both, the charities or the social causes being the recipients of the funding, and the businesses.
Interesting. So you basically realize this is probably a great platform to actually get a lot of people to give a lot more to charities. Where did you see the business aspect of it? Obviously, this is a nonprofit for profit, and
Right.
where did you see that the business part was going to blend in together as opposed to just a donation site?
Well, basically, because as I mentioned, I was doing marketing for a long time. So businesses, they need to promote their brands, and I believe that philanthropy, it's one more channel of communication to trigger a new type of conversation with your clients, to give them a reason, or to give them power. One of the cliches, but actually a very powerful example, is Tom's shoes that you might be familiar with. So Tom's shoes, they probably became the clearest example of how people, by buying a product, they're actually making impact. And I believe that can be extended to different type of businesses. So I started realizing that if we were to make it simple, easy to do, then more businesses will get involved. And the business aspect of it is basically marketing. It's just it's one other type of marketing.
Yeah, so you saw that this is a channel for them to do good, and at the same time that they get more publicity out of it. I've seen a lot of individual use charities as a medium to travel their to customer sites and so on. So they create, like, for example, there's one company who worked with Dans la Rue, which is a local charity for homeless people, and they really promoted that, even though it was completely out of their normal business spectrum. And I was really questioning, is there value in that? Are you really gaining value as opposed to having maybe the goodwill part? Do you see a lot of businesses really thrive by doing this? Or do you see that they jump in and then they sort of say, well, maybe this wasn't for me?
Well, it's challenging for some businesses more than others. I think it's very important to know what type of business, we're talking about. Like the brand. When we talk to a new brand, the first thing we want to know is understand what their audience is, what their clients, who they are, and why are they buying from this company. The second aspect is the social aspect of what is the actual social impact that is going to be made. So there's some qualitative benefits, and there are some quantitative ones, right? So the quantitative ones, which is the one that a lot of marketing executives look for, and which what we try to do with Goowi, we try to help is actually make it as tangible as possible, right? So thanks to to social media, Facebook and Instagram, etc., marketing executives are used to expecting specific numbers, okay, views, engagements, shares, stuff like that. So we try to identify the possibility of creating similar things like that. We have, for example, one type of wave, which is called Get to Give, which is basically a business letting people get a digital dollar or two or five or whatever the business wants and give it to a cause they care about. So this is actually a very tangible thing. So you get exactly how many people grabbed it, how many people gave it to who they gave it. By who I mean what type of charities, right? What type of course. The qualitative aspect which comes with it is fantastic. And it's not to be undervalued, which is the type of conversation that it triggers, both on social media and offline, and it's powerful, because we did an interview maybe 2 or 3 years ago. We went with a camera. We went to the Dawson College here in Montreal, and we interviewed a few people, and we asked them, what causes would you support if you were giving money to donate? And it takes a second for people to say, oh, I would support this or I would support that. Literally, people don't hesitate. But the second question we asked them was, what brands that are giving money to that specific cause that you care about? And I got to tell you, most people have no idea. That doesn't mean that the brands are not giving money to charity. It's just people are not putting one and one together. They're not realizing it, So
Yeah.
this helps solve that problem.
Very nice. We see this a lot even in sporting events where the actual sponsors of, let's say, race cars or soccer or anything, that they ask their fans all the time, do you know all our sponsors? And in most cases, very few beyond the main sponsors, all the secondary and tertiary sponsors. So that's an actual interesting aspect, is how do brands go and quantify if they're not even recognized for giving? And so that's really interesting.
Yeah.
What was the biggest roadblock that you encountered when you first started this with companies or with marketing agencies or people you were approaching? What was the number one pushback that you felt?
Well, I would say is trying to solve the problem with one tool, like trying to have one solution to fix many different aspects. And I got to tell you, it took us a lot of time to accept the fact that it could not be solved with just one tool, it could not be done with just one technology. So instead of just focusing on one fix at all, we started to realizing the importance of personalization, the importance of actually leveraging existing technologies. I mean, there are literally we work with dozens of partners, in terms of like technological uses. So there's no point of reinventing the wheel when somebody else already has an awesome technology that we can leverage on that, right? So our biggest roadblock was trying to come up with a solution that would fix many issues, and then explaining what we did. It took us a lot of time to actually come up with a simple way of explaining what we did, which I hopefully the audience will understand this from the beginning of this
The 60-second elevator pitch.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the hardest things for a lot of companies that I've interviewed is their beginning is with their 60-second pitch to be really understood.
Yeah.
And yours is unique because you're giving to take at the same time, and the dynamic is much greater than just a service being led to one customer or an end person. So that's really interesting. Typically, when you go and see these customers, and I'm calling them customers, but agencies or the people representing the companies that you're going to go and work with as in partnerships.
Yeah.
What is the first thing that comes to that they come up with that sort of like, well, what about this? How will you deal with this? Is there something in particular that you find that's always being asked by your customers? One question in particular, or is it, how the money's going to be distributed? How are they going to deal with it?
Yes, I would say how can we measure social impact is probably the most recurring question that we get asked, both by brands as well as by some charities. Some charities, they have it very clear how they measure their own impact, but some they don't actually, or maybe they do, but not in a very tangible way. So there are charities or social causes that what they do is, they feed kids, for lunchtime, right? For example, here in Montreal, there's a couple, and so it's a very tangible metric, right? So if you donate such and such amount of money, such and such amount of kids will have lunch at school, or how many kids can be taught coding, or depends on the metric. So the first thing we get asked, or I don't know if it's the first, but one of the questions that we get asked the most is how can we make social impact tangible and measurable. It's just not always possible, but we try, and sometimes it doesn't come up naturally. So we have to generate a few sessions with the company, with the charity, with our team, and sometimes we have to be creative, and maybe create a simple unit of measurement that would help everybody engage. The easiest you make it, the more people engage.
Yeah, that's very interesting because that's the first thing that came to my mind was that how do I make this have an impact on my business? And the charity also responding by saying, well, okay, how can we help that business and continue, but also increase our own presence, our own association that people recognize us, right? Because it's a two-way street. Both
Absolutely.
wants.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, you just mentioned that. That's right. I mean, sustainability is key here because, and this is actually a very important aspect that we actually are tackling by helping the charities, because we work a lot with the nonprofits to help them, create more value for their sponsors so that they actually keep engaging, right? Keep engaging. And you will be shocked that most charities are using an old-fashioned way of like putting themselves as a center and just, asking and asking and asking without realizing that the sustainability aspect of it, the economical sustainability aspect of it, is critical. If the business doesn't see value, if they don't sell more of their items, if they don't get more people to talk about their business or to get engaged with their business, I mean, they might do it once, but they might not do it again.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's a great point. That's exactly dans la rue. I had noticed that from that previous person. They struggled to continue with them because it
yeah,
was they were more about themselves, not in a mean way, but in a way that they were not interacting enough with the
yeah,
audience. So it
exactly.
was really just the business pushing their agenda. And that's
Yeah.
something that I notice with a lot of companies. It's difficult because if you're just pushing your agenda, you're not going to get that feedback from the people and from perhaps that business that may not want to continue working with you. Yeah, that's really
Yeah,
interesting.
it is, and it's challenging because you have to find that sweet spot between being too much too social or too business like. So you have to find kind of the middle ground, and it's not always easy.
Hmm. On a typical day, when you get up and you start looking at how do you go about your marketing, you have to look at it and say, well, I need to find charities. So charities are, I guess, are pretty easy to find,
Hmm.
and then you have to find companies that are going to work together with these charities. But there must be a lot of work that goes into the marketing to be able to go and approach them because just calling up and saying, hey, I'm working with this company, if they don't, or this charity, they don't know who that charity is.
Yeah.
So what's your typical marketing plan or marketing action daily around that?
Well, so we tackle both kind of simultaneously. So we go on a charity side and we see what sponsors they're already working with or they have worked in the past, and maybe we can help them kind of re-engage them or regain them. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is businesses or brands that have already supported other causes in the past, that maybe they didn't get enough value out of it, or they could benefit from launching a different type of way, a more engaging one, a more a modern one, a more a technological one. So that's, I would say, probably would say 70 to 80% of our time in searching for new clients, we actually focusing on those two aspects. The rest, we do approach some new businesses from scratch. We are actually working on making it very simple and very cost effective for e-commerce stores, small retail stores, and maybe even personal brands to do philanthropy. We have a couple of new products coming up soon, which are going to make it so cost effective that it's going to be easy and a no-brainer for some of these brands to want to do it and try it out.
So like adding a one-click donation button at checkout kind of idea.
Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of that, right? So we are actually doing things a bit different, but yes, I mean that's definitely one option. But more than that, is like, for example, giving people, engaging them even before they buy. So we want to we want to get brands to be proactive, and not just very passive. Okay, after I sell, I give. There's benefit. There's a lot of marketing and business benefits from actually being willing to do philanthropy before you sell, or right.
That's very interesting. Actually, getting the idea that this company works with XYZ charity, why this charity, and talking about the charity as they're looking and perusing the product. That's really smart. That's true, because coming up at the end, a lot of us, like at the checkout at the local grocery store, if you want to be asked to give away $1, it's sometimes it's overwhelming, and most people probably just say yes, but they don't know what they signed or what they did and where
That's
it's
right.
actually going. So this
Yeah.
is interesting. That's a great aspect. I think that's one of the things that I've always noticed is missing in charity. It's really the information.
Yeah.
And so how do you get people to know your brand? Because also it's not just the charities, it's not just the companies, but now you need to have the everyday users to recognize what your brand is, because if it shows up, they also need to recognize, oh yeah, this is something that I would follow, or some service that I would use, right?
Well, I mean, our marketing strategy is not making Goowi like a key player, right? Because at the end of the day, what we want is people to engage with the brand, the business, the sponsor in question, or the sponsors in question, and the charities in question, right? So we are not necessarily putting ourselves out there frontline. So that being said, we do engage, so we are actually providing all the technology of the back end, so the communication aspect with the clients. For example, when there's a transaction, there's, from the thank you email to a reminder of the event. Let's say if it's an event, of the event coming up. So as a user, you get to engage with Goowi in a few moments, during the transaction and even after. But it's not our key goal to become the main point of attraction. Quite the opposite, actually. It's them, not us.
So you want to be the hidden partner. Does your branding show up during the interaction, or is it
Yeah,
completely just, so it does?
it does. It
Okay.
depends. In some products it does, in some it doesn't. In many it doesn't, because exactly we don't want to take. I mean, there's a lot of attention already need to be put into the brands that actually are supporting, or the brand, and the charities in question. So we try not to take too much of the spotlight, but a little bit.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And so, does a lot of your customers come from referrals? Because obviously, if you're approaching a charity and you're approaching companies, they don't know you. They have to get to know you.
Yeah.
And even if they already know each other, that's one thing. But if they don't even know each other, then they have to get to know you and the charity has to get to know you and the customer, or the brand. So there's a
Yes.
lot of back and forth. So how do you typically work that? Do you get referrals and you go one-on-one meetings? Is it a lot of one customer at a time, or do you have a plan for a larger scale, like so everybody gets to know you?
Well, okay. So when we approach a nonprofit, on average, on a given year, a typical charity already has somewhere between 20 and 40 sponsors already aligned, or in the process of aligning, and so forth. So our first approach is to help them tackle those that they already have identified, already have relationships with, so that we can help them create more value, more metrics. We give them some really cool reports that they can give to their sponsors. In many cases, as a result of that, like let's say one point of contact with one sponsor through one nonprofit, then that same company presents us other nonprofits that they support. And this happens both ways, thankfully. So sometimes we approach a company that supports many nonprofits, sometimes a nonprofit that supports many businesses. So I mean, we're a small team, we're a small company. So right now we have more opportunity, more potential just from that, than having the need to spend a lot of money on advertising and stuff like that. But we will definitely go in that direction eventually. Yes.
Okay, that was my lead up question as well. But so that's really interesting. So most of it is referral, and you're able to go. But when you're pitching this, I guess it's one on one, right? So it's one company at a time. You're pitching this.
Yes.
So, and that's was what my question was going to go to. How are you planning to expand that? Let's say it's fine if it's local or North America, but what happens if you want to start going into Africa or Asia or Europe? That becomes the one-on-ones become more difficult. Are you having a plan to increase the brand awareness of Goowi so that people recognize and say, "Hey, I can use them, and I know I could just go on their website, figure it out, and download, say, an API and put it up."
Yes. So what we are doing is we're working on building integrations with different platforms. These, for example, Shopify, which allows any e-commerce store owner to simply, integrate to their store. And again, we will take very little of the spotlight, in terms of branding. I don't know if you're familiar with Stripe. You know Stripe?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So what we want to achieve with philanthropy, it's basically what Stripe does for a funding aspect. So yes, you do need to trust Stripe, of course, but that's not the key aspect, right? So when you do e-commerce, you don't, as a user, I'm talking as a buyer, you don't care much about Stripe, right? You care more about the store that you're buying and stuff forth. So that's kind of what we're doing. But we are testing some different type of direct ads and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And Stripe's a great example because, no one thinks about it. It's just there. Unless you're a shop owner or an e-commerce owner, you're not going to know what Stripe is necessarily, and you won't care. You're
That's right.
assuming the shop is taking care of all the security.
That's
That's
right.
the onus. So that's really cool. In terms of when you are able to talk to your customers and talk to your philanthropy, do you create a sell sheet, or do you create a presentation each time uniquely to that
Yes.
customer? Okay.
Yes, we do. I mean, uniquely to in many aspects, yes. But I mean, the majority it's obviously shared, right? But yes, we do personalize it. That what I was telling you earlier. We first didn't do that. We first wanted to have one solution, one thing to explain, and it did not work. We have to make it as personal as possible, because by doing that, we realize many aspects. So we for example, and I tell you this. So when we talk to charities, I tell you 90 something percent of charities, they use the exact same sponsorship package, which is a old fashioned PDF, and they send the same PDF to every single possible sponsor. And in those PDFs, the typical is you have the platinum, the gold, the silver, whatever, and a few $1,000 for this, for that. The problem with that approach, and it's I mean, I'm pretty much against it, because the problem with that approach is that if you don't personalize it, if you don't adjust it to the economics, to the business economics of who you're sending that to, you will scare them away. The moment I open something and somebody's asking me for $100,000 donation, it's out of my reach. So I say, okay, that's it. This is not for me. But if you take a few minutes to adjust it, so one of our products that we offer to charities is actually it's a digital version, so it's not a PDF, which allows you to track it. It allows you to personalize it a lot. And you can send to each specific potential sponsor. And we help, so we align, we set up a Goowi expert with the nonprofit to work together. This, okay, to this sponsor, you should send this. To this sponsor, you should send this other thing, right? So I would say that, at least 40% of each, it's personalized. The other 60 is generic.
So that's brilliant. So you actually take it for the customer. You allow them to use your system to personalize the donation packages to their possible donors. That's brilliant. I think that's exactly it. A lot of people don't know that, how much work goes into that, and a lot of them are just copy and paste.
True,
I get that all the time. So yeah. So that's a great question. So in terms of you created all this, and where do you see in the next few years this industry go?
Okay, I think so. I was telling you earlier that about 5% of all the money given to charity is coming from businesses, right? So if you take that, I'm going to use statistics from the United States because they're clearer. So that's about $20 billion, okay, that is given to charity from businesses. In contrast, 270 billion are spent on online advertising, and that's online advertising only. I come from the physical, old-fashioned advertising, which is the typical product, like baseball caps. But I mean, that's another 20-something billion dollars only on promotional products. So what I see is I see philanthropy becoming one more channel of advertising that should channel a good percentage of what is already being spent on other channels of advertising. And if you believe this vision to be so, the impact that it will have in the nonprofits is going to be tremendous. Okay, because just a 1 or 2% switch, we're talking about a lot of money that goes to the right places, right? So that's what I see. I see. Hopefully, if we have another of these phone calls in maybe 3 or 4 years, I could tell you that the percentage of the money given to charity has grown.
I hope it does.
It is growing, though. I mean, I have to say that it is growing. So
yeah, I think I agree with you. It's something that I've noticed a lot with industries and with companies. They're part of their brand is how they are to the public and their charities and how they treat their employees, but how they treat people outside their employments.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting that it's becoming more of a front piece when you're hiring new employees, that they ask that question, like, how do you do charities? What are you doing for charities? And it's something I've noticed a lot in the past couple of years, whereas before it was more hidden or more employee centric, where employees would do them on their own and companies would sort of say, oh, sure, we'll support that. Now it's becoming more of a front and center for companies to actually push. So that's really an interesting aspect. Yeah. So one of the things I always wonder, certainly because you have a business in many ways, because you're sort of, again, working with two sides from charities and from donors. How do you keep both of them informed? Do you use any special newsletters, or is there something that you uniquely say, I need to keep them up to date what's happening in the industry? I want them to stay engaged with me and Goowi, and I want to make sure that they see what's happening out there so they get excited and they continue to do that.
We're using the same approach, which is the personalization, right? So we try to do what we preach. So, on occasions we send the same information to everybody, but we realize that if we can again send you what it might actually trigger your curiosity, then we adjust it, right? So we're not bombarding people with emails. We're not sending boring statistics about the industry to everybody, because we realize most people either don't care about larger statistics, or they do care but they can do nothing about it, right? So we try to maybe send different emails that are personalized, tangible, by the way. So like you can actually do something about this. Like, hey, we launched this new product. Oh, hey, we have this new service. Or hey, how about this? Or how about that? Like the other day, for example, we pitched to a charity. It's very interesting. It's a nonprofit in the United States that they work with women that are in prison and about to get free. So they're actually helping women get back to society, like in training, so they can get a job and so forth. And by the way, I learned so much each time we have these meetings, because I wasn't aware of the social impact behind this, right? Like, for example, 80% of women in prison are mothers, and the majority of them are actually the main supporters of their kids when they go out, right? Like their husbands or partners are not in the picture. So it's extremely important to help them out, right? So we pitch them, a couple of interesting possibilities of working with different brands and so forth. We could not probably share those with many other businesses or other charities that would not make any sense, right? So that's why we're selective of what we send and to whom.
So it's very tailored to the individuals.
Yes.
So, and that's really interesting. So do you have somebody who takes care of that? Because that's obviously time consuming, right? You're going to create, or do you use a software or something?
I mean, from mailing, no, we just use like MailChimp as our mailing system. We did develop our own for our own integration, which is, we use Amazon web servers, and so no, we do it in house mainly with those tools. So.
Okay. And if you were to tell somebody when they're just starting off something similar, let's say not necessarily in your industry, but something very similar, what would be the number one thing you would have thought, like, oh, I needed this. This is something I really should have started off with when I started this adventure, whether it's a marketing person or a virtual assistant, somebody that, or something that could have helped you, that you probably spent a lot more time doing it yourself than you should have.
No, that's a good question. Let me think for a second. Well, I would tell you, so one mistake we made was we jumped into building technology, like building tools and having developers do their thing way too early when we did not yet understand a few things, right? When we didn't have a clear message, when we didn't have a clear value proposition, when we didn't we couldn't put in a few words what the problem was, but we were already building tools and solutions and so forth. So that was a mistake we made. And the second mistake we made was trying to build things when there was already existing tools out there that we could have leveraged instead of building things. So my advice to somebody starting a project would be, don't actually jump into building stuff and first you should try to find what's available out there that you could use. Second is, make sure you speak a lot with your clients and you can actually put in very few words what you're actually solving, to whom you're actually solving it, before you spend time and money in building things. Because what happens is, what's the side effect of this? Not only you waste a lot of time and money, which happened to us, but also is the more you build your stuff, you become kind of in love with your tool. And so let's say, for the sake of argument, that you build a hammer, so you want to use that hammer for anything, right? So whoever comes ask you something, you want to use your hammer. And it takes a lot of practice, I guess, to say, or humility, I guess, to say, okay, now, you know what, this hammer is not what we need, at least not for this specific thing. So we put it aside and we do something else. So I would say, be careful. In that.
Yeah. You're not the only one who says that. That's really common theme among tech entrepreneurs. They build it and they have this sort of mantra of like, I'll build it and they shall come. And then some people get it very quickly, realizing, no, they won't come. I better change it or start a different aspect. And some people become so anchored with their ideas that they push it through for years and it just goes nowhere. It's something that it's really, I think, in all entrepreneurs, it's like we come up with the ideas first and we sort of throw ourselves behind that idea, as opposed to saying, let me get my manifesto of what my mission is set up. One previous guest has talked about that. That's one of the first things they noticed, that they had one business and they sort of switched and they realized, we need a manifesto so we can show people what we're about.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the most brilliant things, because I was like, you need to sort of know what I'm trying to do. So that's really good points. Really good points. I love that.
Yeah. And actually, certainly, I have another point on that. So, there's a lot of startup accelerator programs out there, some here in Canada and some like in the States, that YC Combinator being the most famous one, that they say, you have to build a product that people love. And I took that to heart, right? Oh, we got to build the best thing. And I'm sure that the advice is fantastic. I'm not criticizing the advice, but I probably put it in the wrong place, right? So I started building something that I thought people would love, and trying to like get obsessed about the love situation aspect of it before understanding the problem, before being able to explain the problem. So I would say that advice is fantastic, but after the fact, like after that people really want this, need this, then build whatever you can, the best you can, but only after.
Yeah, I know. Y Combinator is really they're designed around hyperscaling, and people take their information and try to put it into a regular business, and it doesn't really work.
No.
One of the things is that they start off with interview hundreds of people about your idea and then formulate your idea. Then it gets to build the product and then build something they love. But I think most people just start off with, I'm going to build this and people are going to love it. But at the end, it's you who loves it.
That's right.
But that happens every time. And I think even for big businesses and large corporations, they get behind one product and they really believe it and they try to throw it down people's throats, only later on realizing, okay, it didn't really work.
Yeah.
So and I think, I honestly believe that a lot of incubators, they sort of miss that point too. They get very excited about an idea that they also believe in it, and then they start pushing it, but no one really knows what the customers want. And that's a danger for everybody when it goes down. That's interesting.
Yeah. And I tell you another thing, that it might be useful to your audience is, so we were lucky to early on participate and graduate from different type of accelerators here in Montreal, right? So actually 3, in different moments, and we got amazing value out of our mentors and the coaches we got and so forth. But I mean, I can tell you, I have a few anecdotes. Like even the same day, I got opposite advice from very smart and people that I'm very, very, that I admire a lot. And their advice was fantastic. It's just whether you are able to execute it, whether you have the capabilities, the resources, whether your market is ready to execute that specific advice, and then it comes to whether you believe in that one advice over the other advice, right? Like, but for example, we had a opposite advice, like we should focus on large corporations first, or people say no, you should focus on small businesses first, right? Like, that's the typical example. Or you should do integrations with Shopify first, or no, you should first do like one-on-one things, and then eventually down the road things like that. So you have to, I think it's very important that you listen to a lot of, be careful not to get paralyzed, which it happened to me. Sometimes when people tell you to do two opposite things, you might get frozen. And then you just follow what you believe to be the best at that moment in time with your abilities and your resources. And if it doesn't work, then you fix it. You try the other one.
Yeah. That's actually one of the things I've seen a lot mentoring businesses, that people get very hung up on asking a lot of questions to a lot of different people. And I think it's brilliant, except the problem is if you end up with somebody who's been, for example, in retail, and they've run large retail organizations like a Walmart or something like that, and then you're talking to somebody who's a small business person. Yeah. They're going to have two different views of what worked for them, and you may be stuck in the middle going, well, I'm neither, but I'm going to try the big business, not realizing that that's going to use a lot of resources versus the small business. But then if you go to small business, your growth might be too slow.
Of course.
And I think that's something that's difficult. One of the people I remember when I was younger would always say, you need a mentor at the beginning just to formulate your idea, but then hire a coach, because if you're paying for him or her, then you know that you're going to want to use their ideas. Yeah. And it's a difficult thing for people to grasp. But yes, there's so much information, but it can also mislead you or bring you down a path. But it can also be amazing and bring you up, full speed very fast. So
of course,
it's a tough call for mentors and for incubators and accelerator programs.
Yeah.
Something I noticed too in Canada is one of the things I've worked with both American incubators and accelerators and Canadians. And the Canadian versions always be careful. They're like, always don't go too fast. Whereas the American one's like, what, you need to do this today and then tomorrow be $1 million. That's how they look at it. So it's two different speeds also.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. Like I remember this phrase, go big or go home, right? Like every time I hear that phrase, I really don't know how to react to it, because I mean, what does that mean? Like, does it mean that if you don't become the next Facebook, then you're like, you should go home? Does it mean that you should like, either just go raise a lot of money and hope for the best, or like, so there's a lot of, confusion, I guess, that it triggers that type of mentality. I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong. You just have to make sure you apply it if you can apply it. Sometimes you can't,
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. Exactly. You just need to be able to figure out what you want to do. And I think that's part of the manifesto, what the other person had said, my other guest. And they said it, if you don't know where you're going to be in 5 years, then you could be led down a path that's not you. And then it's hard. Yeah. For example, I'm maybe not the character that could bring a next $1 billion Google company, but I can bring up a small company that can be bought up by a larger one. Right. And I have to know what my strengths are. And I think that's where people get too into excitement mode, that incubators and accelerators and all these programs sort of create this hype to get people excited. But at the end of the day, you need to know who you are. Your business might be the corner store that's very unique, but it's going to be a brilliant business that you can hand down to your kids and your grandkids. But other people, it's not. So that's a really good point. Really good point. And I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Now, at this point of the conversation, I think we're good for the rapid round. Are you ready for the rapid round questions?
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
is excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
So let me start with my first one. Since we're talking about in these incubators and accelerator programs, what is the number one hack for you to manage your?
I once came up with the grid where you ask yourself, what's the impact of this action that you're about to take? What's the cost? And what's the time that it will take, right? So the impact, is it high or low? Is the cost, the economical cost, is like, expensive or inexpensive, or is it going to take a lot of time or really quick? So I try to run those three questions in my head really fast before, jumping into whatever task I'm about to jump. And I try to get the best if I can, right? Like, okay, so the most impact with the cheapest amount of money at the lowest amount of time. And if it happens to be the case where it takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and I have neither, then, I pass on. I try to use that. But I cannot say that I'm the best example of time management, but I'm work in progress.
Excellent. Excellent. I was thinking like more like Google Calendar or, time block, but sure. Yeah, that's actually one of the hardest things is I find is to figure out what task has the importance. And if you have 100 tasks, but only 2 of them are really important, the rest could be forgotten. I always tell that, like, do I need to do laundry today? No, I'm okay. I can do it tomorrow. Certainly with the pandemic, I don't need to do it every day.
Right.
And I think that's where we get caught up in little things and we just sort of run through. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's another one. This is one of my favorite questions. I typically shouldn't ask everybody, but I do anyways. What's the number one book you would say any entrepreneur needs to read?
Oof. I love to read. Okay. So I cannot just choose one book. But I have to say that recently I stumbled upon a book that I love. It's called Expert Secrets by Russell Brunson. Do you know this? You know him?
No, I don't.
Okay. So I tell you what. So I stumbled upon him by actually watching a presentation by Tony Robbins. Okay. So Russell Brunson, he's the founder and CEO of a company called ClickFunnels. He grew the company from 0 to like 300 million or something like that, like a really short period of time. I love listening to this guy. He speaks really, really fast, very engaging. He has, podcasts and books and stuff. And as a matter of fact, I stumbled upon this one book, but then he happens to have another 3 or 4. So I'm looking forward to reading the other ones. And his approach is very, very interesting. So I highly recommend that book, Expert Secrets by Russell Brunson.
Excellent. This is the second time somebody stumped me on a book that I haven't heard about. So
yeah, I recommend it. Yeah.
All right, my last question. This is one that I always ask people to, and I should maybe come up with new questions. But how do you manage stress? Being an entrepreneur, and certainly in the startup world, and doing it's one of those things where we can have super high stress and also very quiet ones. But how do you manage it?
Okay, I would say I have let me think for a minute. I would say that I try not to take a focus of the stress that let's say I have with some one person or one issue. I try not to take it with anybody else. I make an effort to make sure that it doesn't contaminate my next conversation, my next thing. I believe I'm pretty good at that. So when I go, let's say, to meeting number 2, they don't realize how stressed I am from the meeting number 1. Let's say, okay. That being said, what I do is I write I write. It helps me clear my mind. So I write a lot, and I believe in asking people's opinions. When somebody can actually give you an opinion because they're either went through it or stuff like that. So I'm not very shy about asking for people's opinion and advice if I think that they can help me with that specific aspect of a stress. Yeah, that would be my approach.
That's great. And journaling I do every day, and I find that's really a brilliant way. It's just to vent out your whatever's in your mind that day and empty it out and start over fresh. First thing in the morning, I open up my journal and I write in.
Yeah,
and it's been therapeutic. I've been doing it for years, so
it is. It is. Yeah, and I think it actually helps also really size the problem, right? Because sometimes we might actually overestimate it or underestimate it. So by taking the time to write it down, hopefully if it's a numbers issue, then you can do the numbers. It helps, I think, a lot.
Yeah, it does. And I think it also keeps you focused. I like to rewrite where I'm at with my projects. And sometimes if I go back a few weeks, I realize I'm saying the same thing every day and I should be moving forward on that.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I loved it. Thank you very much. We should do it again sometime.
For sure. A follow-up one to see where we're going to be at. Yeah. Thanks again, Augusto.
Thank you very much, Olivier.